Welcome inside Black and Gold. We're in the pre-season finale edition, getting ready for Saints Texans to wrap things up in the Caesar Superdome. We got some news on a few Saints back at practice, which was good to see, Jeff.
Yeah, we'll get into all that, and to be clear, this is a kind of pregame edition of Week 3 with the Saints facing the Texans. I do not intend to spend 1 second talking about the Texans. So if that's what you're here for, move
Sorry.
along. But yes, we're going to get into some returns to practice. We're also in the first segment. We're going to talk some news. We're going to talk some mystery, some enigma, if you will, from Demario Davis, because I don't know, he's trying to be a KG for some reason. We're going to talk about what that might be, even though it's completely guessing. And then in the second segment and the third segment, we're going to kind of break down my last 53-man roster projection. This one's kind of cheating because there's a few positions that you kind of got to figure out because there's some players that you might hold on to just to stash them on IR. There's a few positions where I think you are still competing for rosters. So I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit. We'll get into that in the second and third segment. We'll do the second segment on offense, third segment on defense. But first things first, we got a guy back today that I've been waiting to see for a while, since August 6th, nearly 3 weeks. We finally saw number Dose, not CD Deuce, Rashid Shaheed back at practice. He's been dealing with a groin injury, same injury he was dealing with that kept him out of minicamp. It's a little concerning. He got back for individual drills today, not in team drills. It's kind of the ramp-up process we have seen. But regardless, that's a positive thing. You know, anytime you have someone miss an extended period of time, you start to worry that maybe they had a setback. Maybe the injury is more significant than you initially believed it to be. But, you know, the second you see them back out there getting any work in at all, like that was the case with Demario Davis last week, it's an instant sigh of relief. They're like, okay, they are still alive. We are going to continue moving forward. And I think there's a lot of high expectations for Rashid Shaheed in this offense this year. And it's just a matter of whether he can get out there. So that's a good sign.
No, definitely. And at first, when you're looking at the players, I'm like, 22. Wait a minute. Is Mark Ingram back because of the running back depth is hurting right now? Oh, no. Wait a minute. It is Rashid Shaheed. And I know he was out in those joint practice sessions out in California. At least you saw him in street clothes on the sideline kind of thing, which to me is also was a positive leading up to the fact that you knew things were close for him, or at least it appeared to be close.
Yeah. I had to do a double take. I mean, like, who is that guy? Oh, yeah, that's right. It's Rashid. It's
right.
the guy who we talked about nonstop for the first month or week of camp, and then haven't really talked about since. A guy we did not see, and we'll get into more of that later, is the guy who went out with a groin injury on the exact same day is Rashid Shaheed, who appears to be, I don't know, is he alive? We have not seen him. He was one of the only players, even Rashid, he didn't practice, but he was out in LA. Maybe because he wanted to go visit home. He's from San Diego. I don't know. Trey's from Florida. Maybe he took the excuse to go the opposite direction. I don't know, but we have not seen him. The other guys we didn't see at practice today, Taysom Hill, Kirk Merritt, Darrell Williams, Ryan Connolly, Landon Young, Calvin Throckmorton, Lynn Bowden Jr., and Taysom's dealing with that oblique injury. We don't expect him to be out for a while. Ryan Connolly, we do expect him to be out for a while. That was one that I think has cropped up since we last recorded. He's a guy who I was considering putting him on my roster projection, and I still might, because I think he might be one of those guys that, you has a better chance of making the roster now because you want to stash him on IR. So maybe you find a way to sneak him on there just so you can do it, because that is the trick, is if you can put anyone on IR you want during the regular season and they can come back after 4 weeks, but they have to be on your active roster. They have to get through cuts, and then you can do that. So guys like Landon Young, Ryan Connolly, who are not done for the year, but are going to be out for a while, that's going to be interesting. So those were guys who were out there. But the player we got back the last couple days, who is still kind of working his way in, Marshawn Lattimore, dealt with that knee injury out in LA. DA said today he doesn't think it's anything structural, but they're putting him on medication. I think he's dealing with some inflammation, would be my guess. Right. And he's getting some work in. He's only doing individual drills. He's skipping teamwork and 7-on-7, stuff like that. But again, it's like if they're out there at practice, that means that it is not anything super concerning. And, for guys like Demario Davis, Marshawn Lattimore, I think, your season's going to go how they go, because those are big pieces of your defense, and I don't know if you can replace them.
No, and I wouldn't expect to see a Marshawn in the finale, and even Dennis Allen saying, Demario Davis, there's no reason, he needs to work at all. We know what he's capable of, obviously.
Dennis Allen said today he's not playing in the preseason finale. So
right,
yeah, don't expect to see him. Although he has gotten a full workload each of the last 2 days of practice. So I think that's a good sign for Demario. It might not be a great sign for Jaylon Smith, because I think he's here because of that injury, because of the questions surrounding that injury. But one other thing I want to mention, Steve Sidwell, the kind of architect to the defensive coordinator for the Saints during the Dome Patrol years, he died at 78. Best wishes to his family. That's, I think we talk about the Dome Patrol all the time, but we never talk about Steve Sidwell, right? Like we talk about Vic Fangio, we talk about all this. But he's a guy that I don't know a lot of Saints fans will remember that name, but you remember those defenses, and he was a huge part of that.
Yeah, when you hear Dome Patrol, obviously Saints fans remember those good old days, and we dream of having a linebacking core like that. But I think all four of those players, obviously in the Saints Hall of Fame, along with Steve Sidwell. So yeah, R.I.P. to him, and best wishes to his family as well. Sad who dat news on the day.
Yeah. But all right, moving forward, somebody's getting talked about a lot. Whether positively or negatively. We were talking about before we came on, there's been a little, I don't want to say tension, but a little back and forth in the media in terms of, what is the deal with Mike Thomas, right? Jeff Duncan put out a column when we were out in LA talking about how, he's kind of been wishy-washy and he hasn't quite been where you would have hoped to see, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think it was a hit piece per se, but it did kind of paint a very particular picture about a guy who I think anyone would admit has been working back, has been progressing. He's not where you would hope he will be by the time the season starts, but he's, gradually moving along, right? And then, I think, I know Nick Underhill has kind of taken the position of, no, I think he has looked fine. I think he's getting better and better and better. Well, today he Mike probably had one of his better days of practice. I think that it's a bit of an oversell to say he was fantastic. I mean, he did what he's done. I didn't see anything from Mike Thomas today that kind of blew me away, but to me personally, when it comes to Mike Thomas, I think reality is somewhere in the middle. I don't think I'm not as down on Mike Thomas as Jeff seems to be. And I'm not as high on Mike Thomas as Nick seems to be, because I think that's what you're going to get somewhere in the middle. He's not going to be perfect. He's not going to be blowing the top off defenses, but he is going to be valuable and he is going to put up numbers. And, I think we just need to be realistic. I think that's my thing, is just be realistic about your expectations for the guy. And I think that's where the team is.
Well, that's definitely like one of the first things, we have our little pre-pod chat, and I asked you right out the bat, I was wondering, I was like, did I miss something? Was Michael Thomas extraordinary at practice? Because I must have missed it. To me, it was just another day from Mike. And I'm not saying that it was anything great or anything terrible either. It was just an average day. I mean, he caught, 9 of 10 passes, I think, that were thrown his way.
Was it 9 of 10?
I think that's what he ended up with. And the one was a low pass that looked like it was, thrown in the dirt kind of thing.
No, he had a good day. I mean, he did have a good day. But, if you didn't know any better and you just went based on the reaction, you would think he was just blowing the top off of everybody, could not be covered.
One-handed grabs, diving into the end zone, or I don't know. That's why I was like, did I miss something?
He looked like I need him to look, which is consistent. He's gonna battle for balls in the middle of the field. He's gonna feast on slants, and I get it. That is what it is. But this is what DA had to say when he was asked about Mike Thomas at practice today.
Yeah, look, I thought overall, I thought Mike looked good, and I think Mike's looked better and better every time he's come out here. And so, I think he's probably getting more comfortable with where he's at. It's, I think we kind of knew that at some point we'd start seeing what we kind of expect out of him, and I think we're seeing that more and more every day he's out here. So It's been good.
And yeah, like that's, I mean, I think you are starting to see a more representative Mike Thomas of what you can hope to see in the season. You know, it hasn't always been perfect. I think he is kind of working through some stuff. You know, there's been a lot more drops throughout camp this year than I'd like to see from him. But I think he's a guy that locks in when the games go on. And I'm not worried about Mike because I have my expectations where I think is reasonable. And I fully expect him to be there, right? Like to me, 70 catches, 800 yards, 4 to 5 touchdowns. That is what I want to see out of Mike Thomas, right? That like we can be unrealistic as all we want, but that would be a hugely successful season for Mike after what's gone on the last 3 years. Is play 12 to 14 games, catch 70 passes. Right? Be a piece of the offense that is contributing to winning as opposed to a piece of the offense that we talk about as in terms of, man, if only it were there.
Yeah, one of the things I keep saying, I'm sure you feel the same way too. It's like I just want to see Mike be able to last double-digit games, hopefully the entire season, kind of thing. It's been way too long. I agree on those numbers. An 80 catch season, 5 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns would be a huge success considering the guy's only played in 10 games the past 2.5 years.
Right. Like Mike could be looking fantastic right now. It doesn't really matter if he's not on the field week 6. Right. Like, yeah. I don't care how good he looks weeks 1, 2, and 3. How does he look in week 10? And so that's what I'm more worried about. But I think you are seeing more consistency out of him, and that's what people are reacting to. And I think there is an overcorrection going on from a media perspective right now of because I disagreed with what Jeff wrote in the sense that like he was like, oh, he's getting locked up by his safeties. Well, not really. And also that safety's Derwin James, who's probably one of the best safeties in the league, if not the best safety in the league. So, maybe he's not going to win every rep against Derwin James. That's okay. But again, I just think reality is in the middle and everyone's trying to overcorrect one way or the other. And it's just, the reality is that he is a piece of the offense, not the focal point of the offense anymore.
Yeah. And we've mentioned this obviously as well. The number one dude now is clearly Chris Olave.
Yeah, no question.
And, Mike, the biggest thing is can that ego of his accept that secondary kind of role at the receiver not being can't guard Mike anymore to that extent of how dominant he used to be. But yeah, I think he can be, hugely effective. It's tough to talk about him and like have that middle ground, I guess, because it's either, oh, you're bashing the guy or you're overhyping him. There doesn't seem to be that middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I don't want him to accept that role. I want him to feel like he's still
and he will. That the way he
guard Mike. As long as it's not toxic, as long as he's not causing problems. Like, there's a reason you had to trade Brandon Cooks, right? Because he could not accept taking a backseat to Mike Thomas. Now, if can Mike Thomas kind of accept that while also feeling like, no, I can still do the things that I need to do, right? Like I want him to feel confident while also being productive and cohesive with a group. I don't think, we talked to him about being a leader, and I think that's what that is. It's not necessarily having to be the guy on every play, but being available to have a chance. We're kind of shifting gears here. Speaking of a guy who is the guy, we talked to DeMario today for the first time since that calf injury. He seems like he's doing great. It seems like he's in a good headspace. But what he's being kind of cagey about, I asked him if there's a mantra in the linebacker room or in the defensive meeting room this year, and kind of like, the Juice Boys, right? Like that was always a thing. And he said there is, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. And that kind of like fell along the lines of what he was talking about. Here's an example of that.
We got a talented defense, we got a talented offense, and it's for us to be in the right position to go out and make plays. And one thing I know, like having him as a defensive coordinator for all these years, when we're playing good, it helps him be more comfortable as a coach. It helps him, go deeper into his bag of plays to call and be more calm in situations. And so I think that's what helps take it to the next level. But I haven't sensed any uncomfort with him for him to grow from. I think it's a little more swagger on them this year just because it's a little more swagger on all of us for reasons that are undisclosed.
I have trouble gauging like vibe and attitude and stuff like that and how real that is and how much we can tell from the side of that. Is that something that is legitimately being sensed around here? The confidence and the swagger of this team?
Well, I just feel like if you believe in the Saints and you're a fan of the Saints or you Who That Nation, you should be excited right now. That's all I say. You should be excited.
Tomorrow, I know in the past there's been the juice boys bring the juice, that sort of thing. Is there any kind of mantra in the defensive theater this year?
That's good. Let's say TBD. Let's say TBD. Undisclosed. Yeah, there you go. There we go. I like that. We didn't even have a headline. Undisclosed. What's coming? What is coming?
The word of the day.
So will it always be undisclosed in terms of, will it ever be spoken or will it only be seen?
All the above. All the above.
But he wouldn't tell us why. That's I don't get it. Why won't you tell so I think what he's getting at there is I think this group feels like it can be a top defense and with Derek Carr and with an offense that has a higher floor, I think, and a higher ceiling. You could be excited about it. I'm excited about it. I think the closer we get to the games, we saw how that first team offense looked against the Chiefs. I think that there is a lot to like about this group. I think it's very well rounded, and if there's one of the things that drove me nuts the last year specifically was you never got complimentary football. Either you got a solid offensive performance and the defense let you down in their defense. In the defense of the defense, they did not have Marshawn for a majority of that, and that definitely doesn't help. Or you got really good defense like you did the last 8 games of the year, and the offense just kind of got stuck in the mud, and you could only win games. It's kind of stuck in neutral, right? Like that Eagles game where the only reason you won it was because Marshawn made a play at the end of the game, right? Like against the Bucks, you should have been able to put up way more than 16 points, and you lost it because of that. The defense didn't lose you that game. The offense failing to build on that lead despite multiple opportunities to do so, even with field goals, even with just points, put points on the board, you couldn't do that. And so I think that's probably, I think just the balanced reality of this offense. You have a run game. You have an offensive line that you should have faith in with a lot of top picks. You have a very good cornerback group, which is something that every team in the NFL would love to be able to say. You have a really intriguing young group of pass rushers, right? The linebacker room, as long as Pete Werner and DeMario are healthy, is among the best in the NFL. Now, if you talk about depth, that's another question. But with those two guys, I love it. You have your slot corner is Bradley Roby, a guy who could start on the outside for half the NFL probably. There's a lot to like on this team, and I think that's what he's getting at. But for now, it's undisclosed for whatever reason that is.
I guess maybe they don't want to, DeMario doesn't want to hype things up before going into this year. Like we've seen in the past with the Juice Boys. And then it was like, for the rest of the season, if the defense ever struggled, we're like, oh, there wasn't any juice in there, kind of thing. So maybe I get the underselling things right now and like kind of teasing everybody with stay tuned and watch what we do kind of deal. But the only real concern I have with the team going into the year, honestly, is up front on the offensive line. Yeah. But that is a pretty big one.
Yeah. And I mean, I have my concerns about Trevor Penning. I did get a chance to talk to Doug Marrone. I'm going to save that interview and play it on the podcast next week, after we get this final preseason game under his belt. Because I think, that's when we'll start to have to see, like, okay, can he hold up? And I expect him to get another decent amount of reps this weekend. And that's after that, I'm going to go through and kind of watch the film of each game and make a determination. But one of the things that, Doug and DA and everyone have made clear about Trevor specifically is, you'll see him make mistakes. He's a young player. He's only started 1 game in his career at left tackle. He's not going to be perfect every rep. He's going to make mistakes. But the important thing is you understand what the mistakes are and you don't make them over and over and over again. And I think if you go back and, everyone's going to remember that one play where he kind of got beat inside and Kendre Miller got lit up. And it's like, yeah, that's not what you want to see. But the rest of the game, I feel like he did pretty well. And it's like you can't overreact to one bad play by a young player. You have to tell him what he did wrong, and he has to learn from that and not do it again. And I think that is where, with Trevor, you're starting to see that progress where, hopefully by mid-season, those mistakes are gone. You're going to have to bake in some grace for some of those screw-ups. You just have to. And that's always going to be the case, whether he started last year, whether he started this year. You have to learn on the job to some extent at left tackle, and that's what I think you're going to see. But beyond him, I think I feel pretty good about it, right? Like James Hurst at left guard is not perfect, but I do think there's a floor there that is reasonably high, and you can help to the left of the side of the line, right? You put a tight end over there, you send the running back to that side, and you go with it because I feel really good about Ramczyk. I feel as good as I could about Ruiz. I think he's going to continue to take a step forward. And I think Eric McCoy is one of the best centers in football. So, I think as long as you have health in that group, I'm okay with it.
That's definitely the key for sure, health. And I mean, you were out west with those joint practices. I don't think there was anything ever with Penning where it was, too high of highs or too low of lows. It was kind of like he won some, he lost some, and you expect that totally.
Yeah, and I mean, going against Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, right? Like you're not going to win every rep. I thought he held up pretty well. I think, again, you're talking about a guy who has started one game in his career at left tackle. If you're expecting him to be perfect every step of the way, you're going to come away disappointed, right? But he needs to be consistent, and he needs to continue to progress, and I think that's kind of what you're seeing. The penalties are a different story, and we saw a couple pre-snap penalties yesterday. They were dealing with really obnoxious noise in the building, and that was by design. And it sounds like they're going to keep doing that. I imagine we'll get some noise at the dome practice on Friday morning. So that's kind of all I have on that. And unless there's something you want to hit, we can probably move on.
No, definitely looking to close out the preseason for sure and get into the real deal. It's going to be weird having that, week-long break leading up to the regular season.
I'm looking forward to it. It's my favorite.
Little bit of downtime, right?
Coming out of town.
Dennis Allen did mention about getting down to those roster cuts. What was it, Tuesday?
Yes, the 29th. Yeah. I have tried to weasel out of Dennis Allen what his plans are for the starters. He will not budge.
Right.
So we'll have to wait and see. I expect you'll see a good amount of the starters. And you'll go from there. The question to me is Derek Carr. Does Derek Carr play? I think you're going to see a lot of the defensive starters. You probably won't see a guy like Cam or Marshawn or DeMario. But other than that, I expect you'll see a Carl. I expect you'll see the starting interior linemen. I expect you'll see a Debo and Lattimore. I expect you will see
probably not
Tyron, but maybe Marcus May and the Jordan Howden. And I expect you won't see Kamara because you want to get as many reps as you can for guys like Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams. But
you mentioned Marcus May. Was he on our news docket the last time, or was that afterwards?
Oh, I guess we could hit that before we go. So Marcus May, he's been sentenced officially in his DUI case that's going back to 2021. It's been extended forever. He got 6 months of probation, 50 hours community service. I think he has the option to buy that out, which so stupid.
I've never heard of that. I was like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, I guess he has the option to pay it off. So it's like you can either pay a fine or do community service. Kind of defeats the purpose if you allow someone to just pay.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'll just a millionaire. I'll just go, okay, here. How much you want?
Exactly. It's so lame. It's like just if you want the money, just say, "I'll give us the money." He's gonna do something in the community for 50 hours, and it's.
But yeah, obviously now the biggie is we're just waiting for the NFL to make some kind of ruling here, if they make one. I would imagine so, though. And I think we've seen in the past, 1 to 3 games you can expect for a DUI.
Yeah, that's been kind of the standard. I don't think he has had any prior incidents, as far as I can remember. Maybe I'm wrong, but in those cases, typically you'd be talking 1 to 3. I think Willie Snead got 3.
Okay.
When he got it, and he pleaded and he appealed it down to 2. I think PJ Williams might have got 2. Deontay got 2. So I think I'd guess 2. There's so many. There's too many.
Yeah,
Too many
yesterday
DUIs.
the Cajun Cannon's hoping that at least Marcus May could serve his after Kamara did, and I was like, I don't think that's how that works, though.
Well, I mean, they got 2 weeks to figure it out.
I don't think he can. I don't think the NFL will be like, well, since you've got Kamara suspended the first 3 games, we'll do 4 or 5 for Marcus May. I think they'll have to serve, starting week 1.
Yeah, I don't think they take requests.
Right.
Deep cuts only on suspensions. But all right, let's wrap that segment up. We're going to come back and we're going to start going through my final 53-man roster projection. It's not really final. I'll probably update it and post something on Monday after the game, kind of get so I can at least have stuff on record saying this is what I think. Whereas this one is a little cagey, but we won't have time to do a podcast on that. So this is the final podcast version of my 53-man roster projection, and we're going to live with it. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. We like it. We like hearing from you guys. So hit us up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak or at Steve Geller WWL or at the show on at Saints Pod. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. I already said that. I'm saying it again. Subscribe, rate, review.
They've subscribed. They know the drill.
I hope so. Stick around. And we're back here on Inside Black and Gold. I'm going to share my screen. Let's do it. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. All right, we're in business. I haven't finished it yet. It's not
a work in progress, literally.
Yes, quite literally a work in progress, but it is done. So if you're listening to this podcast, go over to WWL.com. By the time this post, that will have posted, and you can follow along with my actual roster projection. I also have a write-up. I'm not going to read the write-up, but if you want more context, go ahead. But yeah, so let's start with the offense, and we'll just go through each position. And one thing that I decided to do with this one is if I think that player could either still miss or make the roster, I have them in bold. If I think they are a lock, they are just there. But I think there's, maybe 6 or 7 guys who could go. I honestly don't think that this is a very difficult roster projection to make. I think probably 48 of those roster spots are pretty much set in stone. And then there's about 5 here or there where you can make a debate over, okay, should they keep an extra linebacker? Should they keep 5 or 6 wide receivers? Which wide receivers should they be? That sort of thing. But, one of the things I am very confident about, and I don't think we really need to talk about it that much, is at quarterback, you're keeping 3 of them. You're keeping Derek Carr, Jameis Winston as the backup, and Jake Haener as your kind of third-string redshirt quarterback. Taysom Hill, in my opinion, is going to be your emergency quarterback, and you're going to have Jake Haener inactive on most game days. And I think if you were wondering whether that's the case, all you have to do is go look out how things went in L.A. If you think Jake Haener is going to be the backup quarterback, he would have gotten some reps during those team drills. You gave all the reps to Derek Carr and Jameis Winston because those are the guys you might have to rely on in games. And that's fine. I think what you've seen from Jake has been good. And, you're projecting down the road from him. But that's why these 3 preseason games have been important, because these are really the reps you're going to see that you need to project on for next year.
Yeah, a lot of hate comes your way if you say, some things negative about Jameis Winston to the hive, I guess you could say, that supports him.
There is a hive.
It just, it's not being overly critical of the guy, but it's something that I just don't feel like he's someone that's going to be around next season. Even this training camp has been pretty shaky for me. If Jake Haener wasn't the rookie, I wouldn't be surprised if he won that number 2 job over Jameis. But right now, he's still too green to take it over.
I just wanted to get that window on its own.
I thought you had video coverage.
No. I do not. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be talked about the quarterback position, but none of it is involving whether you keep all 3 of them, because you are. And it does become complicated because I think you want to keep a fullback, you want to keep a bunch of tight ends. And so I've been getting into debates about, okay, well, why is it so important that their depth linebackers play special teams? Well, it's because you are devoting a roster spot to Jake Haener, who is not going to play special teams for good reason. He's a quarterback. And, you're not going to have Jimmy Graham play special teams for good reason. He's Jimmy Graham. And I don't, that's something we didn't talk about in the news segment. Jimmy Graham is back, and Jimmy Graham, if you lived under a rock, you would have known, you wouldn't have known any better to think like, oh, he's been great this whole time. He went out to LA, he came back, and he looks like the same old Jimmy Graham because nothing has really changed. He's still Jimmy Graham, and he's catching a lot of passes in practice. But that's a position we can get to in a second, because I think the next one to me is running back, fullback. This is the first one where I kind of think there's some deviation of who gets kept and who doesn't. How many running backs do you actually need to keep? I think so. Alvin Kamara, this is a weird one because he's going to go on the suspended list, and at that point, you get an extra roster spot to mess with.
Right.
I was kind of going back and forth with some of the other reporters about this. I think if you're keeping an extra running back, and I know he's been hurt, he's been dealing with a groin injury, he missed the last couple of days. I still think you brought in the veteran running back because you don't want to have to be locked into playing Kendre Miller week 1 if he's struggling, and you want a veteran who can, do stuff that you trust, that can block, that can hold up in pass protection, that can catch the ball. And I just don't think that would be Ellis Merriweather, as much as I like Ellis Merriweather. And Kirk Merritt has been dealing with multiple injuries. To me, right now, if you're adding a running back on that number 4 line, it's Darrell Williams.
Yeah, it's hard to argue just because of his veteran, experience that he's had throughout the league. But I wasn't really impressed with anything he did that last preseason game. Nothing really stood out to me with Williams, and he hasn't been around the team very long either. I'll give him that.
No, and that's the thing. It's like you kind of have to project. But I mean, the Saints went out of their way to bring in a veteran running back.
Absolutely,
they
right.
tried to bring in Kareem Hunt, that didn't work out.
Still
I don't
unemployed.
think he's signed anywhere.
No, exactly.
Yeah, and so you ended up with Darrell Williams, and I just think that you did that for a reason, and that reason is you have Jamal Williams, who I think has been solid and is going to be fine in those first 3 weeks. I know you picked him up in fantasy, and I think he's going to be a stud for at least 3 weeks. I just think okay, what happens if Jamal gets hurt? And in week 1 of the regular season, you have no one to turn to but 2 rookies in their first career game to protect Derek Carr in the same game that you are sending Trevor Penning out there for his second career start at left tackle. If you end up in that scenario, you will be blitzed relentlessly. And maybe they hold up, maybe they don't. I don't want the reason this season goes sideways to be because Derek Carr gets eaten alive with a bunch of rookies not able to hold up in pass protection, right? And so I think that's going to be part of the equation here. And, maybe Darrell's injury lingers, and maybe you do stick with Ellis Merriweather. But I think that's, I think you have to consider that in terms of why do you want that depth? What is the point of that depth? If not to be someone that you can trust and has done it. I think Bobby says skins on the wall all the time. That's why he says it, because it's you need to know what to expect. And right now, I don't know what to expect when the bullets start flying for real. Look at Tony Jones. I think everyone it would have looked at Tony Jones the last 2 years and been like, you know what? He's been solid in the preseason. I expect him to star. I think he's going to be ready to go. And then the game started and he looked like a completely different player. So, I think that's kind of where I'm at. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do really like Ellis and they keep him around. You talked to him the other day. He's very confident. I don't know. I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch, but I'm not going to make my final determination quite yet.
And this is definitely a position, Jeff, that I think when those roster cuts do come down, might be someone the Saints look at a veteran that could have been let go somewhere, kind of thing.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if the guy you end up keeping isn't on the roster right now.
Yeah.
Because right, like if a guy like Darrell Williams, well, the Saints cut him, right? There's guys like that around the league. Maybe they like someone better than Darrell Williams, but he's on a roster right now. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, that's just one of those areas that I think there could be.
Carmichael today, and we talked, almost exclusively about the running back position and the idea of rookie running backs in general. And here's what he had to say. Someone who has popped to me in terms of just being a little ahead of the curve that I might have expected is Kendre Miller. It seems like he's been incorporated in a lot of different ways, particularly the passing game downfield, which I think we've seen a lot of. What have you seen from him in that regard?
Well, I think for him, a guy like him, the more reps he gets, you see the growth happening. And I think that just, when he's had opportunities in the past game, he's come through, and even just, the opportunities he's had in practices as well. I think the quarterbacks are very comfortable throwing him the ball.
Is that something you have to consider in terms of rookies, and just you don't want to overwhelm them with things? You kind of want to make sure they pick it up as they go. How have you seen that from him?
Well, I think obviously there's a big volume that's thrown at him, and as any player, we're trying to make sure we're putting him in the spots that we feel like, hey, that's something that can be successful with, and don't want to put him in any situations where maybe it's not for him. But I think that the opportunities that he's had, he's taken advantage of.
And I think that's not something we have seen a lot in terms of rookie running backs get. We obviously saw it with Alvin back in 2017, but it seems like there's kind of a, I don't want to say preference, but there's a lean toward the older guys. Is that a pass protection thing? Is that just a consistency thing in general?
Well, I think that as you really look at it, I think everybody's getting as much volume as they can with the reps, and I think that's what's most important right now, particularly for the young guys, is the more they can get, the better it's going to be, because there's a lot of learning that goes with it, and a lot of teaching moments, a lot of coaching moments, and even on the plays that have been successful, like we hit him on Kendre on the big play the other day, there's still a little technique to that route that we felt like we still had to coach a little bit.
Gotcha. So this is kind of an interesting season, and that there's always, you got to build in some attrition at the running back position. It's a position where people get hurt at. This is a year where you're going to be without your top running back in Alvin Kamara for the first 3 games. Does that affect kind of how you prepare at the running back position with obviously Jamal, Kendre, and Ellis?
Yeah, I still think that, right now we're still in training camp mode. We'll still get through one more preseason game, and I think after that, as the roster shapes up, then I think that's when you start to really have those discussions, and that all takes into fact with offense, defense, special teams, who's going to be available for the games. And I think that's where you really start to focus on, all right, what's our game plan going to be, where we're going to try to give guys the ball. So I think that'll come here in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I think one of the things he said there that kind of stands out to me is, like, with a guy like Kendre, you want to make sure you're putting him in the positions that you can where he can succeed. And I think that's, again, where I kind of land on. This team typically will err on the side of veterans at the running back position when they can. We saw it with Ingram, right? Like, they could have gone the younger route with the running backs last year. They went with Mark Ingram, a guy they know and trust. The same, they went and they traded for him last year after, again, the Tony Jones experiment just did not work. That was 2 years ago. But, I think that's where, I land on it. So, I'd like to see Darryl out there on Sunday. Hopefully he can be healthy, and if he can get out there and play well, I still feel pretty good about him potentially taking that spot. And we've talked about running backs for a while now. We can move on after this.
No, I was just saying too, like, it's really rare you're going to get a guy like an Alvin Kamara that comes in right away, and you're like, oh, this is the dude. We can get rid of Adrian Peterson. We're all right.
Well, but like, they brought in Adrian Peterson, right? Like,
right,
the fact
exactly.
remains, they felt like they needed to get a veteran out there aside Mark Ingram.
Yeah.
And they had Alvin. They still felt like, what? I would be more comfortable with a guy like Adrian Peterson. And so, whether it works or not is another question. Clearly, they felt more comfortable after week 1 with Alvin, but going into week 1, they did not. So that's kind of where I land on that. But let's move on to the wide receiver position. This is where it gets a little dicey for me. And I'm still not convinced of what I'm flashing up here. I might change it by the time tomorrow rolls around. But for now, I think some people will be happy to see that I have finally caved and moved Traquan Smith off of my roster projection. And, I think a lot of people will be like, well, finally, you've come to see the light. No, that's not really what it is. I've never had an issue with the amount he has produced in a role that I think is underappreciated. He's just a dirty work role, right? And, like, I get it. You want to see big numbers, but I need a guy who's going to go out there and run plays and block. I need a guy who's going to make tackles on special teams. I need a guy who's willing to do all of that and still has some upside as a receiver. And that's why I've swapped him out with Keith Kirkwood. And it's not about what I think of Traquan as a player. It's the fact that he hasn't been at practice for almost 3 weeks. And I just don't see how you can put him on a roster. You know, maybe he comes back tomorrow. Maybe he comes back on Friday and plays on Sunday. And suddenly you're like, oh, there he is. I don't see that happening. And I just think it would send a very bad message to the guys who have been there every day and have been putting in the work. If this guy's just been doing what maybe he's working off to the side, I don't know, but like he hasn't been at practice. He hasn't been grinding on the field with everybody else. And to me, like the health question is what I am more concerned with. The production, I don't care. Like he could catch 0 passes, and I think he still does enough to justify a roster spot. But not being out there when a guy like Keith Kirkwood has been there every day and has a rapport with Derek Carr, a new quarterback, right? Like not the same old quarterback he's worked with before, a new quarterback. I'm cutting Shaq. I'm sorry, I'm cutting Traquan. I'm also cutting Shaq, but I'm cutting Traquan and going with Keith Kirkwood on this roster. It's really the only change, though.
I'm totally in agreement with the Traquan move, just because, like you said, we haven't seen the guy. I mean, I'm surprised.
I'm worried about him.
Definitely, and I thought
okay.
like right now, it's like, why hasn't he been put on any kind of like inactive list or physically unable to perform list kind of thing? Dennis Allen mentioned again today he's still rehabbing. That's as much as we got out of him about Traquan.
Wait, so you can't put a guy on the non-football injury or the PUP list once he's already appeared in a practice. So like that has to happen at the beginning of camp, and that's why you see guys go on even if they come off on day one, because if you start practicing, you cannot go on that. Your only option would be move them to injured reserve, which if you did that right now would end their season. So even if you were planning on cutting him at the end of camp, you wouldn't put him on injured reserve. Now, I think there's a chance that maybe you keep him on the roster. We talked about this a little bit already, and because you intend to put him on injured reserve. I don't know.
It's like a whole little chess game that goes on.
Yeah, and so that's why these last few projections can get dicey, because like I was like, oh, they're keeping him around, but that was always the plan. So it gets kind of weird, and so that's why these projections will never be 100% accurate. But if you're watching this, you can see. But I'll explain it to the listeners. So I have the names I have bolded, which again to me is like, okay, these are guys who could potentially make or miss it. The other guys are locked in. So Keith Kirkwood, A.T. Perry, Lynn Bowden Jr. are the bottom 3 that are making it, in my opinion. The top 3 are locked in: Mike Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. We did see Alontae Taylor returning kicks today. We've also seen Ugo Amadi returning kicks. The reason I have Lynn Bowden Jr. on here is for his returner upside, because I trust him in that role. If you decide that that Alontae Taylor, Ugo Amadi have that return upside, and you don't need to keep a dedicated returner as backup to Rashid Shaheed, then I think you could go get away with keeping 5. And maybe you keep an extra linebacker. Or maybe you keep a Shaq Davis, who's been coming on really strong. Maybe you keep Traquan Smith, even though he hasn't been able to be there, right?
Shaq's definitely made practice fun the last couple of days.
Yes. And I'm not putting him on my roster. I think there's a chance he does do enough, but it kind of reminds me of when you had Lil Jordan Humphrey and Juwan Johnson.
Yes.
As these big guys who have a chance, and you cut them both. Because you kind of feel like, okay, we can, like they're still developing. And I think you keep A.T. Perry on the roster, you cut Shaq, and you stash him on the practice squad. For the same, I kind of feel like there's a lot of Shaq Davises right now in the NFL. I'm not worried about him clearing waivers. He's a lot better right now than he was at the start of camp. I think he's come along a lot. But to me, this is where I'm still going to kind of go is Mike Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Keith Kirkwood, A.T. Perry, Lynn Bowden Jr.
What is the star and 2 stars between Perry and Davis?
Oh, so 1 star is rookie and 2 stars is UDFA.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I was just curious there. Looks good to me. Unfortunately, still haven't seen really anything from Kawan Baker that's made me go, wow. John Trey Kirkland has been interesting, but I agree, maybe more of a practice squad guy than making the 53.
Yeah, I fully expect John Trey to be on the practice squad and I wouldn't be surprised if you see him get called up at points during the season, because you can elevate guys 3 times. And that's another factor, like especially at running back, right? Like you don't necessarily have to keep a running back on the active roster if you want to have an extra guy during the season, because an extra guy for those first 3 games because you could elevate him 3 times. So that's something. But let's move on. Tight end. Now this is a confusing one. Taysom Hill is here. He's not really a tight end, but he's in this meeting room, so that's what we'll go with. Then the question becomes, do you keep Jimmy Graham? Or do you just go with Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau? And I'm kind of vacillating back and forth. Jimmy seems healthy. The seizure situation kind of gave you pause. But, he missed 1 day of practice effectively. He wasn't going to play in that preseason game anyway. And, I don't know what's changed really, other than the fact that you have a little concerned about his brain.
When he was back Wednesday, he looked like the same old Jimmy we've been seeing at least.
If you were under a rock over the weekend and you just came back to practice and didn't know any better, you'd be like, oh, Jimmy looks great.
Right.
He's looked that way all camp. We talked to him on Friday morning, and he was talking about how he feels the healthiest he's felt in years. And then he had a seizure.
Hours later.
Yeah.
That was so strange.
The only depth tight end that I could see potentially making it is Lucas Kroll. And even that, I think, is a big long shot. I think he's a practice squad guy. I think you're going to end up keeping 4 tight ends, and one of them is Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, and a guy on there, Jesse James, you almost forget he's on this team because he's been MIA too for a little bit now.
Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe he's just like, well, okay, if we cut you, you don't get paid. Do you want to just hang around? If we cut you now, you don't get a check. Did we talk about Bryan Edwards getting cut? I don't think we did. I think the last time
either, right?
we talked, it was me saying I'm canceling my subscription to Bryan Edwards, and then later
Saints
in the
agreed.
day, it came out that he got waived. So apparently the Saints also canceled their subscription to Bryan Edwards. Made me look smart. But yeah, Miller Forstall, I still have him written here. He's not on the roster anymore, is he?
JP Holtz.
Yeah, I need to update that. This
swapping him out, whatever. Yeah,
this will be JP Holtz by the time this posts. All right, going down to offensive line. Nothing's really changed here, but this is a position that I wouldn't be surprised if you put Landon Young on the 53 so you can stash him on IR. And when I talked to Doug, he didn't sound like a guy who expected to get Landon Young back anytime soon. So yeah, but otherwise I think, Storm Norton is the only question mark I have in terms of maybe he doesn't make it, maybe he keeps somebody else. But
not
maybe
a fan, so I don't like that one.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Not a fan, so I don't like that one.
Yeah, who are you keeping? The only other option would have been Landon Young, and Landon Young has a knee injury because you need someone to back up Ramczyk.
A significant knee injury, right, as they put it.
Yeah, and so I think, a guy like Calvin Throckmorton, I could see him making it at guard. A guy like Lewis Kidd, who obviously made it last year. Max Garcia, I think, is your backup center, and you say, okay, we want to keep him. Yeah. But I think just like Josh Andrews last year, you just stash him on the practice squad and bring him up as you need him.
Yeah, this is why I guess more so the depth. Like you said, if everyone can stay healthy, Trevor Penning ends up living up to expectations and is a serviceable, at least, left tackle. Things should be good for the season, but depth-wise is a real big concern here. And this is another position I mentioned with running back. When those cuts come, although I know a lot of teams are going to be looking for that depth at offensive line, and I think the Saints could end up picking up a body or two when those cuts end up coming out, just because, there's really nobody here that kind of excites me at all. And seeing Storm Norton making the squad makes me even more ill, honestly.
I wouldn't be surprised if Throckmorton got picked up by somebody on waivers just because he's a guy who's played. Like, he's a guy
who's been around,
who started. He has experience. Coda Martin, I still have him on this list. He has been cut. So, clearly I have not done enough maintenance in terms of the bottom end here. But
you mentioned Throckmorton too. He could definitely be a Denver poaching because he knows Peyton and Zach Strief.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think any of these guys who were around last year and gets cut could end up in Denver. But all right, moving down. That's going to be it for the offense. Is there anything that stuck out to you? Any notes you want to make before we move on to the defense and special teams?
No, just the fact that that wide receiver group really interesting because some things shifted around and changed definitely for me with the Traquan. And I love what I'm seeing from Shaq Davis, but totally agree with you right now. It's like I don't see him making the 53, but certainly worthy of a practice squad nod. I don't know if Kawan Baker's part of that mix, even though he was a draft pick of this team, but it was a late pick, so it's not that huge of a deal. There's not that big of an investment.
I don't think Kawan makes it. I think the only, it like if Trey comes back is healthier than maybe it seems, and you keep him, and maybe you cut a Lynn Bowden and you keep him instead. I don't know. I would love to keep Shaq. I really would. I would love to keep him on the roster. I think he's intriguing. He's only getting better. But I say this all the time: is I can't keep a depth roster guy because he's a great pass catcher when he's not going to get on the field as a pass catcher, right? Like I can't keep two wide receivers who I don't intend to play at wide receiver and are not prime special teams players. Like they might play special teams, but they are not elite special teams players. And it gets really difficult when, again, like I pointed out, you're keeping all these quarterbacks and all these tight ends, and you're keeping a fullback. Like I talked to Anthony Ordry, and he told me one of the differences between the NFL and college is he'd never seen a fullback in his life until he got to the NFL. Like not a lot of teams keep fullbacks, and if you want to keep one, it just costs you a roster spot elsewhere. So I think that's going to work against a guy like Shaq. And but we'll see. I mean, if he goes out and blows up Sunday against the Texans, then I mean, yeah, maybe you do get your hand forced and you keep him around. But for now, I'm keeping him on the cut line.
We've talked about this a little too. So many wide receivers be that star in training camp, and then come the regular season, it's kind of like, wait a minute, who, where did they go? Emmanuel Butler jumped into my head just because he was that, all Metairie training camp darling kind of thing, and then was just non-existent after that.
Airline All-Stars.
Right.
All right. Okay. Well, let's wrap that segment up. We're going to come back and we're going to go through the defense and special teams. Not a ton of surprises. I think linebacker is going to be the biggest point of contention, as I just based on what I've heard on Twitter the last few days. But we'll get into that. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. Stick around. And we're back here on Inside Black and Gold. We are going through one more 53-man roster projection. We have until Tuesday to kind of fine-tune this. We have one more preseason game to go, but we're going to hit the defense now. We're going to start on defensive line, which to me, we don't really have to talk about that much because I think it's the most straightforward position in terms of there are 9 players here that I'm keeping. I think there's 0 players there that have a chance to miss the roster, barring injury. Isaiah Foskey is probably the biggest question mark, but he's a guy you're not cutting. He's a second-round pick. Regardless, he might not even get on the field in the regular season. He might be inactive on game days. Based on what we've seen thus far, I don't know how many defensive ends you want to keep, but the 5th one is a big question mark. And, I actually feel really good about the 4 guys above him in terms of what they've done. And the only guy, so let's just go through the list for anyone listening. So it's Cam Jordan, Peyton Turner, Carl Granderson, Tano Pasnio, Isaiah Foskey, your 5 defensive ends. And then Malcolm Roach, Colin Saunders, who I learned his nickname is Binky, which is a reference to the show Arthur, because he looks like Binky from Arthur. Okay. And then Nathan Shepard and Brian Brzee. All 9 of those guys are locks, in my opinion. And I don't think you're keeping 10.
No, list looking solid. Nico Lalos obviously had a huge game that might get him some attention elsewhere kind of deal, but still not enough to end up forcing your way into this roster. When you look at it, definitely a lot stronger than I expected going into the year, I guess. Foskey, yes, a big question. We've seen very slight glimmers of hope, but yeah, they're not cutting bait on a second-round draft pick just yet. He hasn't been that awful, for crying out loud.
No. And he's not going to get playing time. I think Tano is going to back up Cam, and Peyton and Carl are going to rotate in at the right defensive end position, and I feel really good about it. Nico Lalos is a guy who I could see making the roster if maybe he's just played so well that you're like, we just got to find a way to keep him. Like, it would be a shame to not keep him around. if you can find the numbers. And again, we talked about it. Like maybe if you only keep 5 wide receivers instead of 6 because you really want a guy like Nico on the roster. I don't know. Went to the same high school as LeBron James. Maybe we can get LeBron to show up at a game. That would be worth it in and of itself. But I did, one of the guys that I think we haven't talked about enough in terms of, he's had a really good camp. Is Peyton Turner.
Absolutely.
If Carl wasn't also playing very well, I think he would be a lock in terms of, you would feel really good about getting him in there on the starting line. I still feel really good about that rotation. And one of the reasons is you've seen him just get better and better because he's been available, because he's practiced. And this is what Peyton had to say on that when I talked to him yesterday.
Peyton, one of the things that stood out to me for you throughout this camp is you've been here every day. It seems like the health is really on your side this year. How has that kind of helped you just get into the flow of things a little better this offseason?
I've talked about it earlier this offseason, just having that routine. I feel like I've gotten a good routine of taking care of my body, taking care of what needs to be taken care of for me to go out there and feel good at practice, and then for me to go out there and feel good at game day. So as far as me being healthy, just giving me the opportunity to go out here and actually work on my craft rather than worry about my oblique. Like, I don't really know if I can really do this rep today. I don't know if I can do this rep today. And then, being able to go out there and trust my body on game day, because I've been able to do it throughout all the practice, I think has just helped me have success on the field.
And so one of the things that I talked about with Peyton this offseason, and I think I've been hard on Peyton in terms of, I don't think that he's necessarily struggled in terms of his ability. It's been, has he been available to do the work, right? The parts of the game that aren't easy. Like, I think he's always wanted to play. He's always been an energetic guy when he's on the field. But what about in practice, right? What about at the points where you're getting better? That's where we haven't seen him. And 20 days of practice, he has been at every single practice. And to me, that's a sign of a guy who's maturing. And also, sometimes you can't control health, but I think there's an element of Cam Jordan that has rubbed off on him. Because, if you're in the same locker room as Cam Jordan, there's going to be a standard you are compared to that is not easy to reach. And, you don't have to get to the craziness of a Cam Jordan in terms of durability, but,
good luck, right?
You're not. The curve is ruined. The curve is completely squashed for you. You are either showing up or you're not across from Cam. So, hopefully this is a sign of things to come for him.
Yeah, Peyton Turner, definitely a guy, when you talk to him, you feel that confidence this year that wasn't maybe there in the past. Love seeing him the other day at practice too, letting loose a little. You saw him showing off the dance moves, moving around after he made a big play. Just goes with that whole thing of, being healthy, having that confidence in your role, and being a solid performer. Him and Carl Granderson on that other side of Cam Jordan, can't wait to see it come the regular season, because right now in the practices in the preseason, things have looked really good there, and anticipating big sack numbers from, both those guys to contribute. Hopefully, I'm just saying Carl Granderson and Peyton Turner combined should have double-digit sacks.
Yeah, I think he batted down a ball. I know exactly what you're talking about, but then I think he was hoping like other people would join in, but he ended up being like this solo, and he was just over there like just kind of like pumping his arms like slowly for like 30 seconds.
Exactly. He just kept going. He didn't care. It was the only one at the dance party.
But no, and like one thing about Peyton that you kind of forget about until he's standing there next to you is like he is huge. He's a big dude. Like we talk about how big Marcus Davenport was. Like he is just as big. It's not hard to understand why the Saints were drawn to him as a prospect. Because he's quick off the line. He's huge. We saw what he did against the Chargers in that kind of, he set him up with the outside move and the power move, and then he cut inside and he was able to get that ball out and force that fumble. Brazil picked it up, and so and we can move on, but I've been kind of saying pump the brakes on this guy for a while. It's so much about health with him, I think. And so hopefully we can see more of those flashes this year, and hopefully he can play, he's played 10 games over 2 seasons, right? Can that be 12 this year? Like, I don't need perfection. I don't need 17. I need a majority.
No, I admit Peyton Turner would have been one of those early season takes before we get into things that I've been wrong on, because I was ready to toss him aside just because, to me, seeing him be a healthy inactive on game days, well, that was a problem, and I didn't think that maybe the guy had the heart enough for it, but you clearly see that right now, and I'm glad I was wrong.
All right, let's move on to linebackers, and this is one where, I think DeMario being healthy changes the equation here, because I think you didn't start looking at linebackers until he got hurt, until he had the calf injury that kept him out for a couple weeks, and I think that's when you brought in Jaylon Smith and you were looking at Anthony Barr. It's because, again, we talk about the rookies. You talk about trusting a rookie in week 1 of their rookie season, and I just don't think you want to do it. And I consider DeMarco Jackson to be effectively a rookie. He was hurt all last year. He had part of the offseason, but not much of it. And I just don't think you would have been in a position where week 1 you'd be like, oh, he's our starting Mike linebacker. And so you brought in Jaylon. Now, I like Jaylon. I think Jaylon showed well in that week 2 preseason game. And I have him on my roster here. But, one of the things that Dennis Allen said this week that I agree with completely is if you're going to keep Jaylon Smith on this roster, he's going to have to play special teams. He has under 300 special team snaps in his NFL career in 6 years. For perspective, Andrew Dowell last year alone had more than 400 special team snaps. So, he's going to have to do it, and he's going to have to want to do it. Then that's the biggest question. You cannot keep a veteran around as a depth linebacker who does not play special teams. Can't happen. It cannot happen. And I've been getting into it, people on Twitter being like, wow, that would be the biggest Saints move ever. Like, special teams. Special teams matters. I don't know how else to explain it to people. But I'm keeping him now. And I think you're going to see, okay, let's watch on Sunday and see how he kind of handles those reps. Is he able to make an impact? Is he putting out the effort? Because if he's not, then I'm putting Anthony Orji right back on this line, and it killed me to take him off because he's been my guy since day 1. But I like Jaylon. And I think Nephi Sewell makes more sense as the will. I think he covers better. So if you're going to keep a backup will, that's who it has to be. And Anthony has been working exclusively at the will linebacker spot. He's not going to be a Mike linebacker, at least not this year. So I think the linebackers you're keeping 6, and it is Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Zach Bond. I know Zach Bond, DeMarco Jackson, Nephi Sewell, Jaylon Smith right now.
Why do you think Jaylon Smith hasn't been very active at special teams throughout his career?
Because he's been the starting linebacker. Demario Davis doesn't play special teams.
I guess it's just surprising that, even later on, even with the Giants last year, he really didn't do much on special teams, huh?
That was one of his bigger years at special teams. I think he had 80 snaps. But yeah, he's, Pete Werner does play special teams, but, I think, when Dallas brought him in, they brought him in as a guy who was coming off major knee injuries. They weren't sure if he was ever going to play again, let alone be a starting linebacker. And he was able to buck that and play very well. He's been healthy. But I think probably early in his career, which is when you would have expected him to play the bulk of his special teams, they didn't want to overload him on snaps because, he redshirted effectively that first season. He didn't play because he was coming back from that injury. He was a second-round pick. So that's probably why he just hasn't done a lot of it. That doesn't mean he won't do it. That doesn't mean he can't do it. It just means he hasn't. So in order for him to make this roster, he has to prove that he is not a liability on special teams, that he's going to be willing to put in the work and that he can do the work. And I think when I posted that, I tweeted that, and just to be clear here, if he can't play special teams, he's not making this roster. And people are like, wow, that would be the dumbest move ever. He's the best linebacker of all time. That's why he was a free agent until 10 days ago, and 31 other teams didn't sign him. I
do like what Jaylon Smith brings to the squad, though. Yeah, I didn't realize his special team snaps were so limited. I think he can. It's something he can do. Yeah. I guess the bigger question is there going to be the willingness? And from hearing him speak, totally sounds like that, team kind of guy and realizes where he is at in his career. And I just think that he will be that fit and end up contributing on special teams. Like you said, he's going to have to.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying he won't or can't. I'm saying he going to have to.
In the past. Right.
And so to me, it's if you're keeping him on the roster, that's going to be the biggest determining factor. It's not whether he can start at linebacker, because you're not keeping him to start at linebacker. You are keeping him as depth, and if he does have to start, then you're fine. You feel okay with that. But again, your depth has to play special teams. They have to do it. And so that's why, I think that's part of the reason you see a lot of veterans kind of wait it out, right? Because they're, like a Dalvin Cook is not signing somewhere where they're like, yeah, we need you to play special teams, Dalvin, right?
Has anybody even signed Anthony Barr? I don't think so.
I know he was meeting with the Giants, but then they signed Isaiah Simmons. They traded for Isaiah Simmons, a 7th round pick. So,
Yeah,
I don't
I'm pretty
know.
sure
But
Barr is still on the market.
yeah. But no, I still like Anthony Orji. And like, he's a guy who takes pride in special teams work, right? And that's, one of the reasons you might keep a UDFA over a veteran is because, that's just what they do. And they make teams by working hard at those kind of dirty work areas. Ryan Connolly's another guy I have in bold. And it is, I actually thought Ryan Connolly had a chance to make this roster just straight up. Now he's dealing with that knee injury. It's expected to keep him out a while. He might be a guy you stash on IR. But either way, that's a bummer for him because I think he's played pretty well. Then Ty Summers and Nick Anderson are the other two. I know people are going to be like, well, why not Nick Anderson? Well, if you go and you look at the snap counts from that week 2 game, there was one defensive player, just one, who was active and did not play a single defensive snap. And it was Nick Anderson in a game where you had like 30 guys inactive. In a game where he played, he was in on 12 special team snaps, but even that's a really small number. He did not even, you can't even say like, oh, they were just getting him a lot of special teams work. No, he got 12 snaps. So to me, and he wasn't hurt, not dealing with any injuries as far as I know. So to me, that's just an indicator that I don't know if he's even a candidate for the practice squad at this point.
Yeah, when you're not even getting any run in that second preseason game, that's a big concern for sure. I even asked you, I was like, wait a minute, was Keith Kirkwood even dressed for that game? But, because I was concerned. I was like, I don't think I even remember him being targeted. But, yeah, like you said, he wasn't even dressed for that matchup. And just because I, had been tracking with Keith to make the roster, and I was like, well, if he's not even getting a sniff of anything in the second preseason game, that's not a good thing. But obviously, not being active for that games is a sure sign, for me at least, that they're pretty high on Kirkwood at least for now. But with Anderson, yeah, I don't know if you're not going to see playing time in the preseason. Then when?
Yeah, right. There's some nuance there, right? Like Nick played and didn't get a snap, and that's a bad thing. Keith didn't play,
and that's a
good thing, right? Because that means like he's in that group of like we don't need to see any more out of him. We've seen enough. Right. If you still felt like you needed to see stuff from Keith, you would have him active and he would be like, because you're going to players and I think if you're Keith and you're like, well, if I'm not active, then I better be making this team because this is a chance for me to not only put stuff on tape for you, but to put stuff on tape for everybody else.
Exactly.
And so one of the reasons I feel very comfortable putting Keith Kirkwood on my roster is because he didn't play in that game. And it's kind of weird. But that's kind of, there's nuance involved. All right, let's keep going. We've been on this for a while, so I want to kind of get through it. This is another one. This doesn't have any bolded names. There probably could be a couple, but I feel very confident about the 10 defensive backs I have on here. I've not made a single change in my last 2 roster projections. I think you are keeping a cornerback, Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, Bradley Roby, and you feel good about it. At DB, kind of just that maybe slot corner, whatever, you're keeping Ugo Amadi, Lonnie Johnson Jr., and you feel good about it. Both guys have had interceptions this preseason. Both guys can have cross versatility. They can play safety. They can play. I think Lonnie, you probably have him outside. I think Ugo you would have in the nickel. He's probably your backup nickel. And then at safety, you have Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May are your starters. Jordan Howden is a rookie that you feel really good about, and he's your depth. Marcus May might get suspended. I think that's probably who would take those reps. And then you have JT Gray, who's a special teams ace, and there is no way he's missing that roster. That's 10 defensive backs, and I feel like that position is nailed. I think that is what it's going to be.
It's so amazing to hear from a guy like Bobby Hebert talk about how this is the deepest group of cornerbacks he's seen in the history of the New Orleans Saints. That says a lot. Talking about a guy like Ugo Amadi, got to speak with him a little bit and asked him, like, what's your goal? What do you want to put on tape this final preseason game? And I was surprised to say his number one thing is he wants to get in the end zone. So this dude's not even thinking about just picking off a pass. He wants to bring it to the house.
I agree with that. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, you see some numbers here that haven't been updated. Again, there's some maintenance I need to do on this list, but the rest of it has been updated. So
Anthony
there's two.
Johnson's come alive the past couple practices.
Yes, and so there's two players who I think have a chance to make this roster, and you know, I don't know how good of a chance, but there's still, to me, there's still some hope there in Isaac Yiadom. He had an interception against the Chargers. He's just really solid. Like, I think he's a guy who you're going to try to get on the practice squad. I would love to keep him around. If you can find space for 11 defensive backs, I would love to keep Isaac Yiadom. I think he's been excellent. And then Anthony Johnson Jr., a guy who I think earlier in the week I was saying, you know, he's kind of fallen off a little bit. I felt really good about him, and then he kind of disappeared. He had that one really just brain dead play late in the game against the Chargers where he kind of just did nothing and allowed a 36-yard reception on 4th and 23 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But, you know, the last 2 days, he's got 2 interceptions. He had a couple really nice plays today. He hits hard. He's big. Another guy that I think is a premium special teams candidate, like a priority. And those are the two guys who I think, you know, if maybe a guy like Lonnie Johnson kind of falls off, if he makes some bonehead plays, if he gets hurt and kind of hurts his stock there, and maybe you have to end up putting him on IR or something, I think Anthony Johnson would be that guy. But, you know, Smoke Monday, Jonathan Abram, Troy Pride Jr., Adrian Fry, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I'm sorry with Jonathan Abram, another former Raider. Sorry, bye-bye.
Yeah, he just hasn't done enough.
No.
Troy Pride is a guy I actually thought had a really good start and has fallen off pretty dramatically. You know, I still like him. I still think he's got some upside, but I don't think he's a candidate to really compete for this roster. Adrian Fry has just been struggling since day one, and you know, he's learning. He's a rookie. Yeah, and then Smoke. I know a lot of people like Smoke. I think he's probably going to stick around the practice squad, but you know, I don't. There's nothing I've seen that makes me just like, oh yeah, you got to keep him.
Yeah, out of all those out on the cut list, Yiadom. What's the correct pronunciation?
I go with Yiadom.
Yiadom. He's definitely been more of the standout we've seen. But like I said, Johnson's had a good couple of practices after that goof in the Chargers game.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to special teams, which I don't think it's particularly complicated. Will Lutz has done enough to keep that job.
He's getting traded.
Blake Gillikin has done enough to keep that job. But yeah, so there was a report from Peter King that, you know, we talked about this in the last podcast, but I think, you know, it was about the Broncos potentially trading a 6th-round pick for Blake Grupe. But like, that's weird to me. It almost like if I'm Sean Payton, wouldn't I rather have Will Lutz? Like, why, if I'm trading for a guy and the Saints say, we feel confident in Blake Grupe, you guys should want him. It's like, well, if you feel confident in Blake Grupe, then you keep him. Right? If you think he's worth us trading for, why don't you keep him? And we'll trade you a 5th rounder for Will Lutz.
The guy
if
I
I'm
know,
Sean
right?
Payton, that's a no-brainer. If I'm considering trading a pick for a UDFA that I don't know, I've never spoken to, I'm just taking the word of Darren Rizzi. Why would I not be like, yeah, okay, I'm calling your bluff. You keep Blake. I'm trading for Will. And I don't know why that hasn't been brought up at all. But if the Saints are not willing to trade Will to keep Blake, then if I'm the Broncos, why would I feel confident to trade for Blake? You know, so I don't know. Like, that's not something that I've heard reported. That's not coming off anything. I'm not reporting that.
Right.
But like, just common sense to me, if I'm Sean Payton and I want a kicker I can trust, why would it not be Will Lutz?
Yeah, like you're saying, Sean knows Will Lutz, knows what he's capable of, someone he has spoken to, and might be worth giving up a draft pick for. Whereas Blake Grupe is an unproven, undrafted rookie that Peyton's never been around. He's struggling, obviously, in Denver with his own kickers that he's brought in. I could see it a fit if the Saints end up, you know, having to cut Grupe, but as to trade for him, yeah, that one made no sense to me and kind of was a head scratcher.
Yeah, and I don't understand. Like, I think Blake Grupe has been fine. I think he's been good. But has he been good enough that the Broncos are going to be like sight unseen? Like, yeah, I want that. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of kickers, right? Like, go get Rodrigo Blankenship. Like, there's guys who have done it. And for some reason, it's Blake Grupe that they're desperately wanting. Maybe they're trying to do the Will Lutz thing, right? That's what the Saints did with Will Lutz, is they went and traded for did they trade for him? I think they might have just taken him on waivers from the Ravens. They got really good reviews, but the Ravens weren't trading Justin Tucker, right? Like that was not even a consideration. Would the Saints trade Will Lutz? I don't know, but if I'm Sean, that's the question I'm asking. And either way, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I have Blake Grupe and Will Lutz bolded, and that's why. I don't think Blake Grupe is going to beat out Will Lutz. And that's kind of why I'm making this clear. But I do think there is a possibility that Blake Grupe is the kicker for the Saints because the Broncos really want Will Lutz and they're willing to pay for it. And it's like, I mean, how bad do they want him, right? Like if they wanted him and it's like, will you trade us a 4th rounder? I would take that.
I just laughed that you just got back from a West Coast road trip, got to be on the team bus and everything, never were questioned by security. Yet a guy like Blake Grupe, they're looking at him 5'7". It's like, whoa, hold on. I don't know if you belong here.
What are you talking about? I get questioned by security everywhere I go. No one confuses me for an NFL football player. Let me be clear with you.
Well, you're definitely bigger than Grupe, though.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, if we stood next to each other and I said, like, I'm the kicker, he's a wannabe. Maybe
he's
I
the
would
media
win.
member, or he's the high schooler, even.
Yeah, he's my shadow for the day. I'm the kicker. He's just trying to see what it's like. No, I don't ask me to kick a field goal.
Maybe the
soccer,
media game this year.
I tried to keep it low. Anyway,
and Lou Hedley, I know if I tried being a field goal kicker too, it would be laughable.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would laugh. But and then Lou Hedley, I think he's been fine. I think he had a couple nice kicks the other day, but I don't think he's he's going to beat out Blake. It's so hard. You go into every offseason and be like, yeah, there's competition. Let's see how it goes. But then you kind of see it play out. And it's just like, I know what that guy can do. I've seen it. Like, why would I sacrifice a known commodity to go with a question mark? And if a guy has never played in an NFL game, he is a question mark. I don't care how good he looks in the preseason. You don't know how that's how he's gonna react when the lights get bright and you have to make that clutch kick at the end of a game. You just don't know. And yeah,
I was gonna say you didn't even get into long snapper because you didn't even have competition.
Once you have a long snapper that works, you hold on to him. You never let him go. He's gonna be there for his career. There's only 32 of them.
You can make a solid living. You don't get hit.
No, you make. I don't even know how much you make, but you make enough to live comfortably. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, for sure.
There's 32 of those jobs in the NFL, and once you get one, I feel like you sink your claws into it and you never let it go. And the same thing with the teams.
That's something you definitely don't hear, like these rotating long snappers, unless when you start finding out their names and know too much about them, then there's usually the problem.
Yes, yeah, and they gave Blake an extension, or Zach an extension, and you're gonna.
And then I think Lutz talked about it, right?
Yeah. Yep. There's apparently a 32-man long snapper group text that I would love to get a look at.
Some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, it's kind of like me. I currently am on a group text that I've actively been ignoring, and. Well, actually, I did look at it, but as of yesterday, there was 70 unread text messages. And I'm like, I don't want this. Get me out of here.
Get me out the group. Help me.
Yeah, I have too many group texts. But all right, I think that's it. Anything else you wanna hit before we go?
No, just hoping to see a pretty clean game on Sunday in the finale. And obviously, everyone talks about it all the time. Definitely the injury bug. Please stay away from this team as we head into the regular season. It's been pretty decent this season. I'll say that, things haven't piled up and been to where it's been crippling this team at least.
Yeah, I mean, like there's been injuries, but there's been no major injuries where a star player has gone down and you're already trying to figure it out, right? Like,
yeah, the biggest scare I thought was hearing DeMario getting imaging, and it was like, oh, what does that mean?
Yeah. And Marshawn with the knee, stuff like that, but nothing that you're like, wow, what are we gonna do now? Do they have to go sign somebody because
They got to
so-and-so
trade
is
something,
definitely
right?
out? Yeah, so hopefully they can keep avoiding that, and hopefully this is the year where you just get even reasonable luck on that front, and I think that would change so much.
Amen.
But all right, that's it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. We went through the entire 53-man roster projection, and we're going to be wrong. So let's just find out how bad we are wrong. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. I've said that like 6 times. I've repeated it. But again, because you should do that. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. Check us out on YouTube at WWL Sports. The latest
And then
content.
make your friends subscribe too.
Yeah.
Bug them about it.
Your cats, on their paw phone. You used to call me on my shell phone. Where was I?
Where are we going? Yeah.
Listen to Sports Talk. Steve's going to be on there. We'll both be on there 4 to 8 p.m. on Friday. We only have a couple of those shows left, and then we will hand it off to Mike Haas and Deuce McAllister and run away laughing.
Yes, we will get into some Houston Texans talk on Friday's show.
Yes.
We'll have the voice of the Texans, Mark Vandermeer, joining us, and also former Saint John Stinchcomb, who also calls, is the color analyst for the television preseason games.
There you go. All right, check that out. Anyway, this has been fun. Who dat? Go Saints. Eat chicken. No, that's Chick-fil-A. Sorry. What am I
Wow,
doing?
we got a new endorsement. I was all excited.
I wish. All right, y'all. Peace.
Peace.